Since I watch a lot of horror films, friends tend to approach me sometimes looking for recommendations. And it's a little bit difficult because you're not always sure what people are into or what they think constitutes a horror film. But it did get me interested in thinking about what I felt were the most entertaining or the most important horror films of recent years. So I've compiled a list here of some of my favorite horror films from the last 10 years. Some of them are pretty well known, others not so much, but if you're interested, you should check them out. 2009's The House of the Devil by director Ty West. So this film is from the same director as The Innkeepers, and I believe he did one of the shorts for the anthology series VHS back in 2012. Set in the 1980s, it's about a female student who goes to work for a strange babysitting job on lunar eclipse, and all sorts of horrible things go on. What I like about this film is its simplicity. It achieves the 1980s feel without ever shoving it down your throat like a gimmick. I mean, it's shot on 16mm camera. There are subtle nuances that would hint that it's set in a different period, but it doesn't use that just to kind of propel the film. It's all about it just being a simple horror film, and it slowly builds up the atmosphere. The casting's great. The lead role, I think, is Jocelyn Donoghue, is great in it, and of course when the legendary Tom Noonan turns up, he is as ever creepy. If you like old horror movies, if you like horror movies from the 70s, this one is right up your alley. Check it out. Next is Ben Wheatley's 2011 film Kill List. From the same director who went on to release Sightseers and A Field in England, Kill List is the story of two hitmen who decide to take on a job for a big reward, which effectively goes to hell. Kill List, like a lot of British folk horror, it brings something different in terms of atmosphere and tension. To talk too much about it would give away the plot and where the film goes, but it has that thing about great horror films and a lot of films on this list where there's just this ever-increasing arc of chaos that culminates in an ending that'll just take your head off. It's great. Watch that. Director Robert Eggers' 2015 film The Witch. Continuing on the theme of the occult, The Witch is about a family in 1630 in New England who they basically move to the edge of the wilderness to practice a more devout Christian life and are soon set upon by some unseen evil in the forest. There's already been a lot written and said about The Witch. It appears on all sorts of lists, horror lists, best of for the last 10 years. And, it's extremely critically lauded. A cynical part of me wonders, though, how many people are watching rather than talking about this film, because it's extremely intelligent. The most impressive thing about it for me is the level of detail and the research and the production. And it really gives a depth to the narrative of the story and the characters and the historical background. It's got everything, really. It's got a great score, great acting, a rock and roll ending, and I'm looking forward to seeing what director Robert Eggers is going to do next. Director Na Hong Jin's 2016 film Goksong, or The Wailing. So The Wailing is about a mysterious stranger moves to a Korean village, and subsequently a sickness starts to spread, and a police officer whose daughter also becomes sick becomes embroiled in the situation. So this is from the same director as The Yellow Sea and The Chaser, two films I quite liked because of their more accurate portrayal of Korean culture and characters and society in general. Living in Korea, I sometimes feel I have a more critical eye for Korean films. I find a lot of them are far too overdramatic. Their characters are almost a parody of reality at times. And this director seems to work against that. Don't get me wrong, The Wailing is not a perfect film. There's a couple of hysterical moments. But what it does is move from a light place to a far darker place in the story and narrative. And it shows a strength on the part of the director that you wouldn't see in his peers in this country. I think that he's looking to challenge audiences, especially tackling, some of the themes of Christianity and shamanism, which are deep rooted in Korean society. It is an important film, I think, and one that benefits greatly, like the previous film, about doing its research. See this one. Kiyoshi Kurosawa's 2016 film, Creepy. So moving not far across the pond to Japan, we're looking at a movie by the same director as Cure and Pulse, two, I feel, of the most important Japanese horror films ever, basically. Very influential director and filmmaker. The story basically is about an investigator and his wife who move into their new house, and their new neighbor is creepy, and things get creepier and creepier and creepier. Although some people might not see this as a horror, they might just see it as a crime psychological thriller. It's the director's pacing and and the ambiguity he puts in the story that builds this sense of just tension and atmosphere. And like his other work, it just seems to call to something greater in Japanese culture abound. I mean, the horror, therefore, is kind of found in other places, but personally, it's a horror film to me. It works on that level. See this film. See Pulse, The Cure, or this film. This director is great. Director David Robert Mitchell's 2014 film, It Follows. So a girl sleeps with somebody and then gets followed around for the rest of the movie by something that wants to kill her. It Follows, like The Witch, has had a lot written and said about it at this stage. And I think I've gone on about it a bit too much as well. But I have to say, in the last 15 years, I haven't seen as good a mainstream horror film as It Follows for me. It reminds me of Carpenter and Halloween and the simplicity of a young director taking a few chances. And I think people often highlight what went wrong with the film, but it's minuscule in comparison to what's right with it. From the simple setup, what it achieves technically, to the music. The music is off the chain. I really like It Follows. I think it's an important film. I think it reinvigorated the genre, and it's just a really, really good horror movie. Director Joel Anderson's 2008 film, Lake Mungo. Lake Mungo is a found footage film from 2008 about a girl that's found drowned in a lake, and then strange ghostly things start happening. I'm going to do a video on found footage horror soon, but until I do that, the two films that are found footage on this list I would regard as the two best since the Blair Witch Project. Lake Mungo for me is, it's one of the scariest and saddest, and it's a wonderful film. It did the same thing that It Follows did to me, where it creeped me out. Actually, Lake Mungo, and I remember very distinctly, I was watching the film and had to pause it to shut the bedroom door behind me because I could feel goose flesh and like something could creep up on me. I felt vulnerable. And for a horror fan to feel that is like the jackpot. It's like Vegas. It's great. Check it out. 2014's Creep, directed by Patrick Bryce. This film, Creep, is the other found footage film on this list and was co-written by the main star Mark Duplass. The story follows a young videographer who is hired by somebody to travel out to a remote town and video the last messages of a dying man. Personally, I don't go for humor in horror films very much. I find it's often a little bit misjudged and a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I thought that this film was the funniest horror film since The Evil Dead for me. It perfectly balances tension and humor, and the lead, Mark Duplass, is great. It's just a very funny film and very simple. And the Creep 2 is great too. Watch them both back to back. Director Ali Abbasi's 2016 film Shelley. This is a Danish/Swedish film about an aging couple who are unable to have children, and so they convince their maid to be a surrogate mother. Things start to get dark and darker. I saw online a few reviews accusing this film of being slow and plodding. I think that's ridiculous. I think it says two things. Number one, said people don't understand, the development of structure and narrative and character in a film. And also number two, it might show a little bit of ignorance or bias against foreign film, and maybe a different style of character, of background, of pacing, of culture even. There's not a moment in this film that's wasted and doesn't, isn't part of building up the tension, is unnerving. The film is very good, very intelligent and very subtle. Also, if you're a fan of horror and iconic horror movie posters, if you look at the poster to this film, you can probably guess where things are going. Babak Anwari's 2016 film Under the Shadow. Under the Shadow, mother and daughter, they struggle to cope with the pressures of a war-torn Tehran in the 1980s. And while this is happening, a mysterious evil starts to invade their home. I really like Under the Shadow. It's a very simple story told well, and an intelligent story, and it bears more than one similarity to Guillermo del Toro's The Orphanage, and has very strong performances by the lead character of the mother and daughter. It also is very similar to The Babadook, a film which I personally am not a great fan of, but I know many people are. And I feel that they may have passed over this film because it's an Iranian film, a non-English speaking production. That's a shame. I think this is the stronger of the two films, and I recommend it. Honourable mentions. Ari Aster's 2018 film Hereditary. I like this film overall. It is a little bit flawed in terms of its exposition, but it does a lot of technical things right and is very unnerving and scary. Director Elliot Goldner's 2013 film The Borderlands, about two men out in the countryside in a church looking for scary things, and they find scary things. It's a good found footage film. Check it out. Yoshihiro Nakamura's 2015 film The Inerasable, a film about a writer and a haunted apartment. Harks back to some of the late 90s, early 2000s J-horror films, but it's solid and very atmospheric and a good film. Director Jonathan Glazer's 2013 film Under the Skin, considered by many to be a sci-fi film, but very unsettling, very unnerving, great soundtrack, very ambiguous, and all around highly recommended. Director Alex Garland's 2018 film Annihilation, similar to the last film, seen by many as a sci-fi film, but with many horror tropes and ideas. Well worth a look. So there you have it, a list of films I think are pretty good from recent years. There's quite a variety in there, I think. I noticed that a lot of them have subtitles. I hope that's not a problem for you. If it is, then it's 2018. You need to cut the shit. What's wrong with you? Bye bye.